So I was really interested in chapter 3's reading on the test, on testing and retesting. So I wanted to put that kind of into practice over the last 2 weeks. So recently my students had learned about iMessages, the 4 parts of an iMessage, why it's so much more beneficial than using a U message, just some really good communication habits. And so we had practiced these in class a week or two ago. And then what I did this past week was on Monday when students came in, they had just a small half sheet of paper that they needed to fill out, and it gave them the opportunity to write down 3 different iMessages for me. And so they needed to write down one iMessage that they might use at home in a family setting, one iMessage that they might use at work, and one iMessage that they might use out in the community. And I allowed them, if they didn't have a job yet, because a lot of my students are really young, that they could use that iMessage as an event that might happen at school. So I gave them the example, perhaps your iMessage might be along the lines of, I feel really excited when I've studied hard for a test and pass it because I put in a lot of effort to get there. I need to study next time I have a test. And so after we had talked about that example, I distributed that half sheet of paper, students filled it out and turned it in. And then that Friday, what I did, so 2 days ago, I re-administered the exact same paper to them as a bell ringer. And so we had done the first one on Monday as just part of a class discussion. The one on Friday we did as a bell ringer. And then when students asked, hey, why are we doing this again? I actually used the little funny example that was in our reading. I just found it again on page 77 that talks about, for example, suppose you gave your students a midterm exam on Tuesday, but later in the afternoon, a masked thief, 1, snatched a briefcase containing the students' test papers, 2, jumped into a waiting armored personnel carrier, and 3, escaped to an adjacent state or nation. So I told them that's what happened to their papers and that they needed to refill it, or they needed to refill out the form for me. And then I, of course, explained that, hey, I was doing this as part of my graduate program. But I thought it was really interesting that the students still did really well. So they picked most students picked maybe different topics to write their iMessage about. Some who had, for the school scenario, had put something negative, I feel frustrated when. This time they put something maybe positive or use a different emotion, I feel excited when, or I feel mad when. But it was still the results were very, very similar. Students got about the same score. Students who didn't know what all 4 parts of an iMessage beforehand still didn't know all 4 parts 4 days later. And students who did know all 4 parts still got 100% a few days later. So anyway, I just tried to put that into practice this week.